The Fire of Defiance, an auto de fe. In the year 1682, the city of Seville, Spain, thrummed with life, its bustling streets lined with merchants, nobles, and peasants alike. But on this particular day, an eerie stillness hung in the air. Church bells tolled solemnly, their echo resounding through the narrow cobblestone alleys, beckoning the citizens toward the town square. Today was a day of reckoning. Today was the auto de fe. The square had been transformed into a grand theater of faith and punishment. Banners bearing the symbol of the Holy Inquisition hung from every balcony, and the townspeople gathered in their finest clothes, murmuring in anticipation. Wooden platforms had been erected in the center, with towering stakes prepared for the condemned. The cross, symbolizing the church's dominion, loomed above it all, casting its long shadow over the gathering. Among the crowd was a young man named Mateo, his heart pounding with dread. His father, Señor Elias, had been arrested weeks before, accused of practicing the forbidden faith of their Jewish ancestors in secret. Mateo had grown up listening to his father's stories, whispered tales of their heritage, of a time before fear ruled their lives. But now, his father was one of the accused, standing trial before the eyes of God and man, his fate to be sealed in fire. Mateo watched, unable to speak, as the condemned were paraded through the square. They wore cloaks marked with flames, the sanbenitos that branded them as heretics. Their faces, pale and gaunt, betrayed the terror they fought to hide. Some had already been absolved, sentenced to exile or lifelong penance. But others, those like Mateo's father, were marked for a far worse fate. The Grand Inquisitor, clad in his dark robes, ascended the podium. His voice rang out across the square, booming with authority as he announced the charges: heresy, apostasy, blasphemy. For each crime, a sentence was declared: lashes, exile, or death by fire. The crowd remained silent, their eyes fixed on the stage, as if witnessing a divine judgment. When Señor Elias was called to stand before the Inquisition, Mateo's breath caught in his throat. His father, once strong and proud, now stood shackled and frail. Yet, even in chains, there was dignity in his posture. He searched the crowd and found Mateo, their eyes locking for a brief, heartbreaking moment. "You have been found guilty of heresy," the Grand Inquisitor proclaimed, his voice devoid of mercy. "For abandoning the true faith and returning to the practices of Judaism, you shall face death by fire, so that your soul may be cleansed and sent to the judgment of the Lord." A murmur swept through the crowd, some gasped in sympathy, others nodded in approval. But for Mateo, the words were a death knell. He felt a wave of helplessness crash over him. His father was no criminal, no heretic. He was a good man, a father who had raised his son with love and honor. And yet, here he stood, condemned to die. The condemned were led to the stakes, bound with rough ropes as kindling was stacked at their feet. Torches were lit, their flames flickering in the growing twilight. Mateo's fists clenched as he watched the inquisitors step forward. He couldn't tear his eyes away from his father, who stood tall, his gaze unwavering even as the flames began to climb. Señor Elias looked once more toward Mateo, and in his eyes, Mateo saw no fear, only a sad acceptance and a final, silent message: live on. Remember. The fires roared to life, and soon the pyre was engulfed in a terrible blaze. The crowd watched in reverent silence, the heat from the flames licking at their faces. For the Inquisition, this was justice, a necessary act to purify the faith and rid the world of heresy. But for Mateo, it was nothing but an unbearable loss. As the flames consumed his father, Mateo felt something inside him ignite as well. It wasn't fear or despair. It was anger. It was defiance. His father's death would not be in vain. He would not forget. He would not bother the forces that sought to control them. When the fire finally died down and the charred remains were all that was left, the crowd began to disperse. The spectacle was over. The Inquisition had made its point, and the people returned to their lives. But Mateo remained, rooted to the spot, staring at the smoldering ashes. His mind was a whirl of emotions, grief, fury, and a newfound sense of purpose. A gentle hand touched his shoulder, and Mateo flinched, turning to see Father Rodrigo standing beside him. The priest, who had once been a friend of the family, wore an expression of false sympathy. Mateo, Father Rodrigo began softly, I grieve for your loss. But you must understand, your father's soul is saved now. His sins have been burned away in the fire, and he will stand before God, purified. Sath. Mateo's voice trembled with rage. You call this salvation? It was no sinner. It was a good man, and you let this happen. Father Rodrigo's expression hardened. Careful, Mateo. I understand your grief, but do not question the will of the Church. Your father strayed from the true faith, and the Inquisition's judgment was just. You must accept it. Mateo clenched his fists, but he knew better than to argue further. Speaking out against the Church could seal his fate just as it had sealed his father's. With a curt nod, he turned away, unwilling to hear any more of the priest's platitudes. As the square emptied, and darkness began to fall, Mateo stood alone. But not for long. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a woman cloaked in black, her face obscured by a hood. She approached Mateo quietly, her movements deliberate. Do not be afraid, she said, her voice calm and steady. I was a friend of your father. My name is Sofia. Mateo tensed, eyeing her warily. A friend? I've never seen you before. Sofia nodded. Your father kept many things hidden. For good reason. We are part of a secret order, people who resist the Inquisition's tyranny, who refuse to live in fear. Your father was one of us. Mateo's heart pounded. His father had been part of something larger? Something that went beyond their family's quiet life? Sofia stepped closer, lowering her voice. Your father believed in a world where people could live without fear of persecution. He died for that belief. Now, you have a choice. Will you join us and continue his fight? Mateo was silent for a long moment. The weight of his father's death hung heavy on him, but so did the realization that there was more at stake. This wasn't just about his family. It was about fighting against an oppressive force that had claimed too many lives. I'll join you, he said finally, his voice firm. Sofia smiled, a faint but hopeful expression. Meet me tomorrow night at the old chapel outside the city. Will show you the way forward. And remember, trust no one but those you meet there. The Inquisition has eyes everywhere. With that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Mateo standing alone in the square. But he was no longer the same person who had come there that day. His father's death had lit a fire within him, a fire of defiance that would not be easily extinguished. As he turned and walked into the night, Mateo knew that his life had changed forever. The auto de fe had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. He would fight. He would resist. And he would honor his father's memory by standing against the forces that sought to silence them. The flames of the pyre may have died, but the fire within Mateo was only just beginning to burn.